Moments ago. Let's go outnumbered overtime. I'm Harris Faulkner. President Trump is calling for a massive $1.5 trillion investment in the nation's infrastructure as part of his budget. A plan the White House says will cut through a lot of red tape and boost the economy even more after years of spending money on overseas commitments. Watch.
We're trying to build roads and bridges and fix bridges that are falling down, and we have a hard time getting the money. It's crazy. But think of that. As of a couple of months ago, $7 trillion in the Middle East. The budget was recently passed, and the reason it was passed is because of our military. Without the military, it's possible there's no reason for us to be meeting.
The president's budget remains a hard sell, though, for his fiscal hawks in Congress and his party. Congressman Mark Meadows, among them, chairs the House Freedom Caucus. Watch.
The real problem with this particular one is that our leadership caved, the swamp won, and the American taxpayer lost. Our original play was to make sure that we funded the military. We kept other spending flat. That's what we passed, and yet what we got put on the House floor just a few hours later was this unbelievable budget deal that spent American taxpayer dollars.
So what's in it? What does it look like? Chief White House correspondent John Roberts is now live from the North Lawn. So we carried, John, the president live in that meeting and talking about infrastructure, and then it popped up in all of our devices. The budget is out.
Correct. The budget was released at 11:30 this morning in the middle of that meeting that the president had with state governors and local officials to talk about rebuilding the infrastructure of this nation. Let's put it up on the screen so that you can follow along exactly what the president's planning to do. $1.5 trillion total he's hoping to invest in infrastructure. However, the federal portion of that would be just a little bit more than 10%, $200 billion, which would be used in federal seed money and loans and other type of grants to state and local officials. The White House working off the model that one federal dollar can generate as much as 40% in project dollars. Some programs like the Transportation Infrastructure Finance Innovation Act have proven that they can actually scale up to that degree. Also, $50 billion in rural infrastructure. That would be in the form of block grants to governors. The president also wants to streamline the permitting process to 2 years. He would do that in part by having one agency take the permitting lead on a particular project. Then there would also be changes to trade, education, and licensing. For example, if you were a plumber in Florida and you wanted to go work on an infrastructure project in Oregon, that license would be able to transfer instead of having to get a separate state license. The president, as I said, just met with governors and other local officials to really kind of play up the idea of his plan to rebuild the infrastructure. Listen here.
I'm not so sure it's shifting the burden. I think what we're giving is states and local communities the opportunity to leverage federal dollars to invest in the projects that the federal government has not been able to do for years. I mean, the reason the infrastructure is crumbling is because the bureaucracy here doesn't enable us actually to move forward. So what we're going to do is to empower the states and localities to use some federal dollars to match it and to reinvest in their communities.
Apologies. That was the legislative director, Mark Short, talking about criticisms that this is shifting the burden over to states. Let's take a look at some of the other measures in the budget. An additional $300 billion for the military. That was agreed to last week by Congress. $23 billion for border security. That would hire an additional 2,750 Border Patrol agents and put $18 billion over 2 years into building a border wall. It would give $13 billion to the fight against opioids in this country. And then this is particularly controversial. Cuts to domestic spending to save $3 trillion in 10 years. It would take a large chunk of Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and other social programs. The OMB director, Mick Mulvaney, defending those cuts yesterday. Listen here.
Take the money that the Democrats want to put to these social programs and move it to things like infrastructure, move it to things like opioid relief, move it to things that are in line with the president's priorities, so that if it does get spent, at least it gets spent in the right places.
As you pointed out at the top, though, Harris, a lot of conservatives don't like the budget one bit, particularly the fact that given all of the extra spending, the deficit in 2019 will top $1 trillion. That's enough for even Dr. Evil to be shocked. Harris?
Oh, my goodness. And that's enough from John Roberts on that, shocking us with that. Thank you very much. Florida Congressman Ted Yoho is a member of the House Freedom Caucus and sits on the Republican Study Committee. A lot to study today, Congressman. I understand that members like yourself don't like this. Is the swamp winning?
They seem to have won on that bill. I voted against that. I think it was too much spending on the domestic side. We're trying to save money and invest that in America, which we need to do. And this went the wrong way. And if you heard Rand Paul, that bill passed in the Senate with no debate, no amendments being added. It was a closed process. And whenever you have things done in the closed rooms at dark, they can't be good for the American people. And now you see what's in it.
Well, the last time that we were looking at caps being raised in spending, we saw a lot of Senator Rand Paul as he tried to block some of it. But this one going forward, tell me, if you will, about the certain areas that you take exception to, because there are some big numbers and there are some areas which really need it, like in rural areas, the $50 billion in infrastructure spending through block grants to governors.
Oh, we definitely need that. And if you look at the American Civil Engineer Society, for 20 years, they've been saying most of our infrastructure has a grade of a D out of A, B, C, D. And so they're failing, and we've known this. We've got to invest in the infrastructure. We haven't had a major investment in America since the Eisenhower era or John Kennedy with the Apollo program or the Mercury program. So we've got to invest in America. We're living off those investments that were made 50 years ago. The question is, where's the investment in America for the next 50 years? And we've got to start with the infrastructure. There's ways to pay for this that we can that are outside of the box. In fact, we've got 3 bills that we're introducing to help just that. And so we need to do that because that's jobs, economy, trade. And if we don't do that, we're going to fall further behind in the world.
Congressman Yoho, I'm going to ask you to watch something with me. Jim Jordan says that the House Speaker has some problems after the spending deal. Watch.
Do I think the Speaker has problems? Yes, I do.
You say he's got problems, Congressman. Is it time for a change?
Well, you know, look, we'll have that debate at the appropriate time. You asked me if there's concerns with the Speaker. I think there are big concerns because he just presided over one of the biggest spending increases in the history of this country at a time when we were elected to do just the opposite.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Why do you say that?
Well, because we got sent up there for fiscal responsibility. This bill is not fiscally responsible. And, you know, we sent a bill over to the Senate hoping it would get better. It got a lot worse. You have the increase in domestic spending. I think it was $132 billion. We're going into deficit spending right away. Before the end of this year, we're looking at $1 trillion deficit. And the range out there, I hear $300 to $500 billion over the next 2 years. Additional spending, and you add $1.5 trillion onto our debt in the next 3 years. We need to get this curve under control. You know, people talked about the spending for the military, how vital that is, and it is. I mean, the military has been decimated by sequestration. We're consuming it at a high rate, and so we have to rebuild. And so everybody said, well, we have to pass this bill to shore up the military. I agree we have to shore up the military, but if you listen to the experts out there, and even Admiral Mullins a couple years ago, he said the biggest threat to our national security is our debt.
All right,
so we can do a short-term fix on the military, but if you're not addressing the debt, you're going to have a big bill to pay, and it's going to affect everybody.
Got it. I want to step in there because some of that I think a lot of people have heard before, and their big question after hearing what you're saying, and many of them voting and saying that's why they put you in office, is are there some people missing? What happened to the we're going to make government smaller Republicans on Capitol Hill? Where are they?
It makes you wonder, doesn't it? And that's why, you know, I heard Jim Jordan's comments. Anytime a speaker is in power, they're always in jeopardy, you know, because you've got to balance things. But to bring out spending bills that aren't conservative in nature, and we criticize the last administration for running deficits. Of course, they got them under control by the $1 trillion taxes they put in through the Affordable Care Act. Yeah, you would think we would be more conservative, and there were 76 Republicans that voted against this bill. So that is cause for you to concern, you know, with the leadership bringing up a bill that 76 members of his own party were voting against it. And John Boehner did the same thing with the Bipartisan Budget Act. Only 74 Republicans supported that bill. And, of course, he's not here anymore.
Congressman Yoho, before I let you go,
Sure.
You know, there has been criticism even wider than within your own party that Republicans are starting to spend, if maybe they already have and have been, like Democrats. You're in a midterm election year.
Sure.
How do you differentiate yourself from the party that spends and spends and has always done so when you look so much like them now?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Harris, and that's something that the representatives are going to have to go back to their district and justify. That would have been an easy bill for me to vote for because it had hurricane relief for Florida, it had help for all of our farmers, and we got phone calls from so many different groups that wanted me to support it. But then you have to look at the bigger picture. What's best for my country? What's best for America? Because this bill will have to be paid for, and the austerity measures that you're seeing in the president's budget, reforming or cutting programs, that's just the beginning of what's going to come in 4 or 5 years if we don't get this spending under control today. You know, we either deal with the mandatory spending, or in a couple years, that will dictate to us what we have to cut. And those will be ugly cuts. We have the power to be proactive and make sure we do the cuts that are smart, that take America forward. We invest in our infrastructure the proper way and don't throw all this fluff on there.
You know, I don't do what you do at the level at which you do it for certain, but it is a sad it's hard to wrap your head around it. I know you said that there were some options, but we didn't get to see those walked out, and we knew how important that element was. I hope you'll come back to the program, Congressman Yoho of Florida. Thank you.
Sure, be glad to, Harris. Thank you.
All right. So has the president changed the way Republicans think about deficits? Let's bring in Charles Payne, host of Making Money on the Fox Business Network. You know, Charles, I want to start with this, where the markets were last week. And they started to rebound. And again, I don't do what you do either. So I'm watching today while the president was holding his roundtable with state and local governors and leaders, and the Dow started to have a little bit more oxygen. But talk to me about where we really are when you do this kind of spending and corporations.
Well, here's the thing. You know, it's easy to talk about, you know, being fiscally responsible and all that. And I understand that where the House is coming from, but Republicans in the House versus their Senate colleagues, but who have a razor-thin margin. But, you know, no one ever talks about going after entitlements. Nobody. I don't care who you are. The Freedom Caucus, no one. So in this budget, the White House goes after discretionary spending. Right? They do their two-penny plan. They go after waste, fraud, and abuse in Medicare. But I think what we're probably looking at, and the two presidencies I'm looking at to sort of use this as a roadmap, are Barack Obama and Ronald Reagan. Because both presidents came in after a real difficult period, economic period. Both of them had a lot of deficit spending, right? The high deficits as a percentage of GDP. What was interesting on Ronald Reagan, though, is we had an average GDP growth of 3.6% in the 4 years after he implemented his plans. For Barack Obama, it was only 2%. So where's your difference there? In the last year, Congress, 2016, implemented 211 laws. You know how much the government agencies implemented in terms of new rules? Almost 4,000. So we've already seen President Trump start to whittle those away. I think he's playing the hand that he's been dealt. It's one thing to talk all this political rhetoric. I think we're over it. We're adults. Let's be honest about it. You don't have the political will to do what you say you're going to do. So if President Trump is indeed the king of debt, at least if he uses this to grow the economy, it will have a much better chance of growing our GDP and bringing people, you know, sort of generating economic prosperity than, you know, using deficit spending and high taxes and more regulations.
You know, Charles, as you're talking and we look at the cuts to the domestic spending, that's what you're talking about over 10 years. But when you look at entitlements, and you hear Speaker Ryan talk about this, when you add up all those numbers, they don't even approach what you just signed for 2 years, $300 billion. So it's never really going to offset. What's it going to take to get us to stop spending like we are? Well, they're spending other people's money.
Well, also, let's be honest. I mean, again, it gets right back to those so-called entitlements. And everyone watching pays into Social Security. Everyone watching pays into Medicare and these things. But unfortunately, the government has overpromised what those payments will do. You know, according to their math, they should be generating 8% a year on the money that they take from our paychecks. Obviously, they're not. So, you know, what's in the Social Security lockbox? Probably cobwebs and a bunch of IOUs. So it's really tough. And again, you've got to be honest about this. I would have loved to have seen some fiscal discipline. But having said that, if President Trump uses this deficit, this debt, in a way to generate stronger GDP, to generate supply-side economic benefits, which would have a greater ability to lift all ships, then that's probably the best possible outcome against the realistic political backdrop that we exist in.
The markets are liking something. Maybe it's that Charles Payne came on and sat in the mezzanine today.
As soon as the official budget was released, we had a spark. We were up 380, gave 100 points back, and as soon as that budget was released and people looked at it again, we started to rally again.
We should make it known that the budget is not binding coming from the president, but it is a blueprint of kind of his policy making and what he'd like to see in place. So it gives investors that certainty, which I've learned from you, Charles Payne. They like certainty rather than not. Thank you. I'm going to cut in now with a little breaking news. The New York Police Department has now confirmed a letter containing an unidentified substance was sent to a Manhattan apartment building. That unit belongs to Donald Trump Jr.'s wife, Vanessa. Here's what we can report at this time. Vanessa Trump opened the letter. She was taken to the hospital as a precaution. This happened about 10 a.m. this morning, and so we are just getting the confirmation of that. Another network is reporting that the suspicious letter with an unknown substance that was sent to that Manhattan apartment to the daughter-in-law of Donald Trump, our president, a letter containing that unidentified substance. The hospital run was just as a precaution. As we learn more, the specific nature of what was in that letter and how Vanessa Trump is doing, we will bring it to you right away. Just getting on the record with this, and our newsroom, as you can imagine, is working the story. Meanwhile, the White House says President Trump has full confidence in Chief of Staff John Kelly, despite the growing firestorm on how he handled abuse allegations against a White House aide. This, as a group of Democrats are now demanding to know when Kelly found out about those accusations, whether his job could be in jeopardy. Well, we haven't heard that, but Democrats are asking. And the immigration debate is heating up on Capitol Hill. Again, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is planning to bring it to the floor tonight as President Trump is going after Democrats, saying they don't really want a fix for Dreamers as much as Republicans do, whether Congress can get a deal. Stay close.
This president is the only one who's being sincere in trying to fix and find a long-lasting solution for the DACA problem. The immigration system is broken. This president knows it. It is so dangerous for the American people to have all these loopholes in the immigration system.
Fox News alert, the Senate is set to begin a rare open-ended debate on immigration. A procedural vote is scheduled for later this evening. Earlier today, President Trump said he thinks they can get a deal done to protect Dreamers. But over the weekend, he tweeted Republicans want it more than Democrats do. Meanwhile, the White House is floating a possible compromise that includes keeping current legal immigration quotas in place in exchange for some border security measures, which conservatives say they want. Alfonso Aguilar is the president of the Latino Partnership for Conservative Principles. He met with White House officials last week who were trying to broker a deal on DACA. How much do you think we are closer to getting that deal right now?
Well, I think we're close, and it's because of the leadership of the White House and the President of the United States. And we have to make that point clearly. The reason why Congress is talking today about immigration and providing a path to citizenship to up to 1.8 million Dreamers, it's because of President Trump. And I know that the Democrats don't like that idea because they love to use the issue politically. But we are close to getting a deal. The framework that the White House has put forward is a framework that is balanced and that can lead to compromise. And that's the key word, compromise. Both sides are not going to get everything they want. They're going to have to accept things they don't like. But at the end, we're going to get a good immigration bill that's good for the nation and that it provides relief to the Dreamers. But it does require the Democrats to sit at the table and have an earnest conversation with Republican leadership.
Mr. Aguilar, do you think the line has shifted? I mean, in terms of politics, we saw former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, now Minority Leader, in the House getting pushback, physical pushback, at an event she gave a couple of months ago where there were Dreamers who were very angry that Democrats haven't done enough, in particular that particular one, even though, you know, more recently we saw her hold the House floor trying to hold up the spending bill for DACA. Do you think the line has moved toward the Republicans? And if so, why?
Well, I think so. I think Democrats are being pressured by extremist groups. And when you see those Dreamer groups, they're not representative of the majority of Dreamers or even of of the immigrant community. I think Democrats are beginning to realize that there are many Hispanics, that there are many dreamers who want to see a solution and that see the president's framework as something that is balanced. You know, Nancy Pelosi said that the president's framework is a campaign to make America white again. I mean, this over-the-top narrative just doesn't play very well with Hispanics who, when they see the framework, they see that it's a middle-of-the-ground proposal that, again, can provide millions of people a path to citizenship. But having said that, let's not forget, it's also tough on border security. It would expand fencing, which we need to secure the border. The bulk of heroin that's coming in the country is coming from the southern border. And it also would end chain migration. Now, the White House is open to negotiating within that framework. That's why the idea of perhaps doing away with certain immigrant visa categories is being considered, but not cutting legal immigration levels. That's a very interesting idea that can bring on board a lot of Democrats.
You know, I'm going to be kind of bold in what I think. I think so anyway in what I'm saying. The president has said some things that Democrats want to hold his feet to the fire about with regard to minorities and race back in the campaign, so on and so forth. But it sounds like you're more cutting through to what's being done. What do you say to those critics that say, judge the president more by what he has said and tweeted and not by this policy?
Harris, and that's exactly the point. We have to look at his policy proposals, not at what he tweets, the comments that he may say. I mean, I'm sometimes taken aback by the comments that the president makes, but he has his own personality, his way of being. We're not going to change Donald Trump. But I think we have to look at the policy proposals. And we had a great meeting with General Kelly and Secretary of Homeland Security Nielsen. They understand the issue. They're committed to pushing this through, and they're also committed, and I don't think people realize this, to having a broader conversation about immigration and even address some of the other outstanding issues that will remain after this debate. Look, it's been 30 years. We've had President Bush, President Obama talk about immigration reform, and they were not able to accomplish it. It may take somebody like Donald Trump, who's been much maligned as anti-immigrant, as anti-Hispanic, to get something done. I think Hispanics and most Americans are tired of just speeches and words. They want to see actions, results. And I think the president has put forward something that may actually lead to concrete results for the good of the country.
Real quickly before I let you go, others in the Hispanic community, have you done any sort of polling, anything that says, yeah, you're on the right track, this is the president to get it done?
Yes, because the left tries to paint a broad brush in terms of the Hispanic community, just saying that, you know, they're all Democrats and liberal, and that's just simply not true. Many Hispanics, I would say perhaps even the majority, realize that this proposal is a middle-of-the-ground proposal. Let's not forget, 38% of Hispanics voted for Donald Trump. I mean, Hispanics care about other issues besides immigration. So if he gets this done, clearly Republicans and President Trump will make inroads with Hispanic voters. Hispanic voters are identified as independent. They're currently voting for Democrats because they feel that the Republican Party, with their rhetoric, is marginalizing them or offending them. But I think if they show that the policies of the Republicans, things like the tax reform, like immigration, is benefiting them, I think they will respond very favorably and support Republican candidates.
Alfonso Aguilar, we will bring you back as this makes its way through. You just had your meeting at the White House a week ago, and things are already changing. Look forward to the future and talking with you. Thank you.
All righty.
Chief of Staff John Kelly is facing growing concerns over his handling of a White House aide accused of domestic abuse. Whether his days in the West Wing could be numbered. Former Trump campaign spokesperson Katrina Pearson will weigh in. She's coming up next. Stay close.
I think all the stories about replacing General Kelly are mostly being fed by people who are unhappy that they've lost access to the president under General Kelly's leadership. I think that talk about the chief's departure is much ado about nothing.
Fox Fox News Alert continuing fallout now after two White House officials accused of domestic abuse by their former spouses have stepped down from their posts. Now, Chief of Staff John Kelly is facing a firestorm of criticism in the wake of reports that he knew about the accusations against Rob Porter back in September and kept him on the job. There are reports Kelly is willing to resign over this, but the White House says Kelly still has the president's support. Meanwhile, top Democrat Adam Schiff tweeted this: the failure to fire Rob Porter earlier and the constant churn within the White House are indicative of a central moral failing and a conundrum facing all of the president's staff. How do you ethically serve a deeply unethical man, end quote. Here to weigh in on all of this is former Trump campaign spokesperson Katrina Pearson. So, Katrina, first of all, thank you for joining me on this.
Thank you, Harris.
This story has kind of moved a little bit because at first it was all about Rob Porter and then he was gone, and now the focus is on John Kelly. What are your thoughts?
Well, it makes you wonder who was the real target here, Harris, and it's truly unfortunate that this is also being politicized considering that the climate that we're in. I think part of the confusion in a lot of this, and it's continuing to drive a lot of the talk about this particular story almost a week now, is that not everyone knows the process that goes through the day by day to obtain a security clearance. In some cases, depending on the nature of your role, it could take a year, it could take 2 years. And in this case, it has taken quite a long time to get there. And I will say, John Kelly is a very good man. He is an honorable man. He has served his country and has a sacrifice many of us will never know. He did not hire Rob Porter.
End of statement. Okay.
End of statement.
Okay, so you say that it's taken a while with this security clearance. He may not have hired him, but the FBI took statements from Rob Porter's ex-wives. And so that was known, at least in terms of a question, why isn't this national security clearance in play? And I would imagine that somebody on the staff would have asked that. I mean, you know from working with the campaign kind of what the feeling is about these issues. And all across the country, we're having a discussion at a 37,000-foot level about the treatment of women. So there might have been some extra sensitivity. Maybe we take Rob Porter, put him aside, and figure out what's going on. Your thoughts?
Well, you're absolutely right. This discussion is being had all over the country, and many people would like to know before taking action, and if this investigation was ongoing, which apparently it was, come to the conclusion. Here's the thing. When you fill out your SF-86 form, that release of information goes only to the investigative agency, not your friends, not your peers, and not even your boss. So we really don't know what information made it to whom and when, but we do know there was an investigation. And once proven true, it is safe to say that his clearance may not be adjudicated and we'd be right where we are today.
Katrina, where do you put the comments that the president made? And Kellyanne Conway got on the record again saying that the president believes, quote, you have to consider all sides, something that we have heard him say after other such situations where the nation was perplexed as to which side would you believe over one or the other.
Well, you're speaking of a man that has been attacked from all sides on a daily basis. So he's probably speaking from personal experience whenever he does address these issues, being accused of everything from, hating people, being racist, and even a Russian spy for that matter. So of course he takes the objective point of view, and in his tweet he did mention that some of them are true, but unfortunately those that are false, Harris, those lives are being destroyed because the average person doesn't have the money, the time, or the resources to fight allegations such as this, and people are losing their livelihoods over it.
Katrina, as a spokesperson for the campaign formerly, and now looking at this White House, what would you think would be a good thing for them to do next?
Well, I think now, obviously they're going to be under attack for the remainder of his presidency. So I'm not really sure you can avoid anything. We do know that there are agents in the swamp that are still trying to hurt this administration. I would say it is really time to clean house. We've got to get rid of the Obama holdovers. We have to get Mitch McConnell to get the appointments confirmed. We still have several people that have not been confirmed yet, and that's unacceptable. We need to get our people in and get the bad guys out to move forward.
And those people who, if you look deeply as to why they don't have security clearances, or we had another staffer at the White House come forth with, as we learned, domestic violence charges against them. Get rid of them too?
Well, we have to investigate.
Deal with that situation?
I think each situation is separate. We can't just blanket everyone. Each investigation has to be handled separately. And if, in fact, these allegations turn out to be true, the matter should be handled swiftly.
All right. Katrina Pearson, great to see you. Thank you very much.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. A Democratic House intelligence member says redactions are now underway. And their rebuttal to Republicans' surveillance memo could be sent back to the White House as early as today. The president objected to its release last week, saying Democrats sent a very political memo that they knew would need redactions. Our power panel will weigh in. Stay with us.
But if there was political pressure put on the department by the president, or if these redactions would take out of context what the FBI was trying to do in seeking its application against Carter Page, we can't support that.
The growing showdown over Democrats' rebuttal to a GOP House intelligence memo alleging surveillance abuses during the 2016 campaign. Let's talk about it. It's about to get spicy. Redactions are now underway on the Democrats' memo after President Trump objected to declassifying it Friday. Now a Democrat on the committee has told CNN it could go back to the White House as soon as today. The president over the weekend slammed the initial rebuttal, tweeting, "The Democrats sent a very political and long response memo, which they knew, because of sources and methods, and more, would have to be heavily redacted," whereupon they would blame the White House for lack of transparency. Told them to redo and send back in proper form. But ranking Democrat Adam Schiff says the president had a much different motive for rejecting it. Watch.
The president doesn't want the public to see the underlying facts. What is revealed in our memo are quotations from the very FISA application that really demonstrate just how misleading the Republicans have been. The president doesn't want you to see these facts from the FISA application because it completely undermines his claim of vindication.
Power panel now. Lisa Booth, president of High Noon Strategies, and back from Outnumbered, Marie Harf, former spokesperson for the State Department. Both are Fox News contributors. Lisa, I'm going to start with you. My head almost exploded as I was listening there to a Democrat say, oh, no, we're going to completely show you that the facts were different. I'm paraphrasing him. When no one has said that, actually.
Well, and Chairman Gowdy also made the same assertion that President Trump laid out in his tweet, that the Democrats intentionally tried to set it up where there were sources and methods to try to hamstring the Trump administration and put them in a negative spot. But look, I think ultimately what needs to be done here is releasing the original application for the FISA warrant and the subsequent extensions, and that way this conversation is no longer left and right, and ultimately Americans just get to see the underlying information.
And the importance of that? Why do we need to know it?
Well, I think the concern here is the fact of what you've got from the Nunes memo, as well as what Senators Grassley and Graham laid out, and the fact that the dossier was used to obtain a FISA warrant against someone that used to be affiliated with the Trump campaign. And I think the big issue here is also the credibility of Steele, because he even said in a British court that he cannot verify his own dossier, yet the FBI used it to obtain a FISA warrant. So I think that
to spy on Americans.
Right, which is incredibly concerning.
So, Marie, again, what I was pointing out is that no one has said, at least on the record that I have seen, that what is in the Republican memo per se is going to be shown to not be true by the Democratic memo, which means facts can't be changed. So what's the point of seeing another one? I want to see everything, but I just want to know your opinion.
Well, I actually think a lot of Democrats believe that Chairman Nunes cherry-picked information. He only used certain things and didn't use others, and made accusations that are not true based on that. That he has made a claim that the FISA process was misused here to surveil Carter Page, when in fact there is no evidence that we have seen that it was misused. Carter Page, his application was renewed 3 times based on a multitude of information, and no one has been able to point to anything. So speaking to Lisa's point, that's why it would actually be helpful to see the unvarnished truth in the FISA application. But the Democratic memo also needs to be released. The longer the White House refuses to do that, this looks partisan.
Well, but the president hasn't said that he won't release it. He said it's got to go back. And I recall
But they didn't do that to the Republicans.
But I do recall that there were some changes made to that original Republican one, too. It may not have gone through this direct process from the White House, but Democrats were pushing back. Well, they didn't want changes to it.
But you can't say it's the same process when President Trump put out the Republican memo over FBI and DOJ
It's more than twice as long as the Republican.
I also think
it's only 10 pages.
I also
it's not like
think
a novel.
There's been a loss of credibility for many on the left. When you had Obama administration officials lying to us and telling us they did not spy and unmask names within the Trump transition team. We have Schiff has been saying all along that there's collusion, but is yet to provide any evidence of collusion. You have Hillary Clinton and the DNC having lied about the fact that they were behind the dossier in the first place. So I think there's really a loss of credibility for those on the left.
And it's that money trail that has been problematic all along. I mean, what did the FISA court not get in terms of useful information that may have changed the game altogether? But I want to go back to just kind of the overarching situation here. Would you say, Marie, that both sides have been damaged in this process? Because, I mean, you've got material coming out of the House Intel Committee. In the very end, we may end up seeing evidentiary support of the FISA application. I mean, it's in the bloodstream of America now. It was never really meant to be there.
Well, look, I think that the House Intelligence Committee, unfortunately, I would argue largely because of Chairman Nunez's behavior, but let's say—
Of course you would. You're a Democrat.
Well, he's also the chairman, and he's in charge of setting the tone. And this week, he built a physical wall separating the staffers from the two sides. So he's not—
Did Democrats fight that?
He's not— absolutely. He is not setting a tone of bipartisanship. But I'll give you this. The House Intelligence Committee is not functioning in the way it should. The Senate Intelligence Committee, Richard Burr and Mark Warner, Republican and Democrat, have actually managed to work together in the kind of bipartisan manner that they should be.
But you've also had those on the left file a complaint against with the House Ethics Committee against Chairman Nunes, and it found out that he did not abuse classified information. He did not handle it incorrectly, which the allegation likely came from the left.
So keep things equal, fair. Don't spy on us unless you know that you're doing it for the right reasons, and keep us safe. We'll be right back. Stay put. With the midterm elections fast approaching, President Trump will reportedly look to rally his base with more cultural issues, perhaps like NFL players kneeling during the national anthem. Is that a good way to get Republicans to the polls? Could it backfire? And maybe, I don't know, incentivize Democrats to go to the polls. We'll talk about it.
Wouldn't you love to see one of these NFL owners, when somebody disrespects our flag, to say, get that son of a bitch off the field right now, out, he's fired.